In the Viking world, justice was swift, merciless, and utterly horrifying. From duking it out for your honor to the gruesome blood eagle, today we're uncovering 10 Viking punishments too brutal for the faint-hearted. We are starting today off with one of the most spine-chilling punishments you've ever heard of from the Viking era, and yes, it is as gruesome as it sounds. The blood eagle. Described in the Old Norse sagas, this method was definitely not for the faint of heart. So picture this. The unfortunate victim's back is sliced open right along the spine, then the ribs are cracked and yanked apart like a grotesque pair of wings, and finally the lungs are pulled out and draped over this absolutely horrific display. This brutal spectacle was said to be reserved for really high-profile enemies, kind of like a terrifying tribute to appease the gods. But before you get too carried away with visions of Vikings going full horror movie on their enemies, it's worth noting that many historians think that perhaps the blood eagle might be more myth than reality, perhaps cooked up as a bit of a dark poetic license rather than an everyday execution method. Next up, we are talking about Holmgang. This was like the Viking version of calling shotgun, but it was way more intense and definitely not about getting the front seat, so it kind of wasn't really like shotgun at all. Imagine you've got a beef with someone. Maybe they insulted your knitting skills or you're wrangling over land. That's where Holmgang comes in. It's a duel, but not just for the heck of it. It's about honor and settling disputes like true Norse warriors. You'd square off in a marked area, maybe on an island or a specifically chosen field, armed with whatever weapons you agreed upon. Now, winning meant settling the argument in your favor, but losing? Well, that could get ugly very quickly, ranging from severe injuries to meeting the Valkyries in Valhalla. And here's the real kicker. Backing out of Holmgang wasn't an option unless you fancied being labeled as an outlaw or getting the cold shoulder from your Viking pals. So when Vikings said, "Let's take this outside," they really meant business. Speaking of becoming an outlaw, next up we're talking about outlawry. So imagine being declared an outlaw in Viking society. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was like being officially ghosted by everyone you knew. If you were branded an outlaw, you were basically off the legal grid. No more protection from the law for you, buddy. Anyone could take a swing at you without worrying about the consequences, making every shadow a potential threat. Plus, you couldn't own land or hang out with the community, no more feasts, games, or market days for you. Essentially, it was like getting a one-way ticket to Nowheresville. Population, only you. This harsh punishment made sure that everyone else thought twice before stepping out of line, keeping the Viking communities tightly knit and orderly. So, in a way, being an outlaw was like being the ultimate outcast in a world where your social network was everything. Next up, we are talking about corporal punishment. When you think about Viking justice, it wasn't all about dramatic sagas and gory spectacles like the Blood Eagle. Sometimes it was more about good old-fashioned bodily harm. Vikings dished out corporal punishments that, while less theatrical, were still pretty harsh. Steal something and you might end up a little lighter on ears or nose. Not exactly a subtle way to remind you not to do it again, right? Whipping was actually another go-to method for smaller offenses, serving both as punishment and also public humiliation. These physical punishments weren't just about causing pain, they were a very clear message woven into the social fabric. Step out of line and there is a tangible price to pay. So in the Viking era, keeping your nose clean was more than just a figure of speech. It was a literal survival strategy. Next up, we're talking about staking. Viking justice wasn't known for its subtlety, re the Blood Eagle, but one particularly gruesome example is stake death or staking. A person found guilty of serious crimes like betrayal or massive breaches of trust gets impaled on a sharp, towering stake. Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, but for the Vikings, it was a very real and very terrifying way to enforce the law. This method was the ultimate display of don't even think about it to anyone considering crossing some very serious lines. The sight of someone suffering a stake death would have been a very vivid and chilling reminder to all about the vital importance of loyalty and following the community's rules. It was brutal, but effective. Viking style. Next up, we are talking about execution. When it came to the ultimate punishment, the Vikings didn't shy away from making a strong statement. Execution methods varied, and what you got could depend heavily on what you did, or unfortunately, who you were. Hanging was a straightforward affair and could be reserved for common criminals. Drowning, particularly grim, was sometimes used for specific cases like witchcraft or major betrayals. And then there was beheading, which could be considered somewhat honorable, often reserved for nobles or those of higher status caught in serious wrongdoings. Each method was a very clear message of deterrence wrapped in the harsh realities of Viking law and order. So in Viking society, how you crossed the line could very much determine how you'd literally end your days. Next up on our list today, we are talking about slavery. In Viking times, winding up as a slave wasn't just a consequence of being on the losing side of a battle, it could also be a punishment for certain crimes. Imagine getting caught up in some shady dealings and instead of a slap on the wrist, you find yourself stripped of all of your rights and freedoms and turned into someone's property. For these unfortunate souls, life as a slave was rough and came without any guarantees of regaining your freedom. However, there was a glimmer of hope. Slaves could potentially earn or buy their way back to freedom, or they just might get lucky and be freed by a generous master. This harsh reality served as a reminder to everyone in Viking communities about the very severe consequences of breaking the law or getting captured during conflicts. Next up on our list today, we are talking about fines and Weregild. In the Viking era, fines and Weregild were kind of like the old school version of hitting someone's wallet to keep the peace. If you messed up, but not too badly, you might just have to cough up some cash as punishment. But if things got really serious, like say you ended up killing someone, the Vikings had this very intense system called Weregild. It literally means man price, and it was the amount you had to pay to the victim's family to settle the score. This wasn't just any random number, it was carefully calculated based on the social status of the person who was killed. Paying up was crucial. If you didn't, you could end up sparking a bloody feud or facing harsher consequences from the community or the law. So if a Viking took someone out, they better have their coin purse ready to make amends and avoid turning a personal mistake into an all-out war. Next, we are diving into Shunning and Exile. So imagine being a Viking and waking up to find that nobody in your village will talk to you, trade with you, or even acknowledge your existence. That's what shunning was like. In Viking society, where everyone depended on each other to survive, being shunned was like being a ghost among the living. It was a tough, informal punishment for smaller missteps that broke the community's trust. But for more severe offenses like betrayal or dishonor, you might find yourself slapped with the harsher penalty of exile. Being exiled meant you were kicked out of your community for good. You'd have to survive out in the wild, away from the safety and support of your village, often in brutal conditions. Whether it was temporary or permanent, exile was a reminder that playing by the community's rules was not optional. It was a tough love kind of deal. Mess up and you're literally out in the cold. Next on our list today, we are talking about scarring or branding. In Viking society, scarring or branding wasn't just about dishing out a punishment, it was like posting a medieval beware sign right on somebody's body. Imagine walking around with a permanent tattoo that screams, "I messed up," big time. That's what scarring or branding was like for the Vikings. This method was used to visibly mark someone who had broken the community's laws or social norms. It served as a walking billboard of shame, constantly reminding both the marked individual and everyone else of the wrongdoing. This public display helped enforce social norms and deter others from breaking the law, making sure everyone got the message loud and clear. Follow the rules or wear the proof of your mistake for everyone to see. And next on our list, we're talking about the confiscation of property. So imagine you're a Viking and you decide to get a little sneaky. Maybe swipe a neighbor's fancy new sword or fudge the numbers in a trade deal. Well, now, guess what? You'd quickly find yourself on the wrong side of Viking law, which could mean kissing your own goods goodbye. That's right, if you were caught in the act of theft or fraud, the community might just confiscate some of your own property as payback. This wasn't just about punishment, it was also about making things right. If you took something that wasn't yours, the law would take something of yours and use it to compensate your victim. It was very straightforward, it was a tit-for-tat approach that kept everyone on their toes, making folks think twice before dipping their hands into someone else's stash. In Viking times, what goes around really did come around, especially when it came to property. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Goodbye. What is up, everybody? Okay. Alright, Viking punishments. Some of the worst there are. In the Viking... my voice just cracked. Oh my god, alright. Oh, I put a word in here I shouldn't have, but... Okay. Next up on our list, we are talking about fines and Weregild. Weregild? I don't know.